In this video, I'm going to show you how to edit a drone video in Davinci Resolve by breaking down the edit of one of my latest drone videos with the Mini 5 Pro. And this is actually a condensed version of the full editing breakdown inside my drone filmmaking course, Flying Filmmaker. So if you want to check that out, you can head over to flyingfilmmakerpro.com. So let's dive right in. So all of this footage was shot in 1.5 days up in the mountains a couple weeks ago. I just needed to get some footage with the Mini 5 Pro. And so in a relatively short time, we got a bunch of good shots of the fall colors. And just workflow wise, I took all of this footage, put it on a timeline, cut out all the bad parts, and then I color coded the clips that were like really good. Like I really want to throw these in the video as orange. And then the clips that I thought really had potential but weren't quite as good as apricot. And then the pretty good clips as yellow. And then just the relatively average, I'm not sure if I'll actually use this clip or not, but I don't want to delete it out of the timeline, as blue. And we started out with about 3 hours and 40 minutes of footage and sifted that down to about 2 hours and 5 minutes. And so then coming to our main edit timeline here, for now we are going to mute all of our sound effects tracks. We will get to that later. So the first step was to find a song that I liked. As usual, I used Artlist. I used them to license all my music. For this kind of nice fall colors, I wanted a fairly chill, not too energetic song, but I just threw down my basic music track for this video. I knew this would be fairly short because I didn't have a ton of footage to work with, and I actually cut it down from the original was about 3.5 minutes long. I cut out a section that I didn't like as much and just cut from where it sort of goes down here to the ending at the end, cut it down to about 2.5 minutes. So I put that track on the timeline and then started building out the timeline. First shot here, nothing super crazy going on. I wanted this to be a nice shot, one of my favorites. I really like this top-down perspective. I always like to put one of my best shots at the beginning to kind of hook the viewer. And then I threw a DJI logo on here just for cool. And then on this next clip, we are doing some fancy stuff. I 3D text this shot on DJI Mini 5 Pro into the shot, and then I'm actually flying through this clip. Now there's actually an entirely separate lesson in the course on how to 3D track text into the scene. So you can go watch that to figure out all the details of how I did this, but I just tracked it into the scene. And then I actually went over here into the color tab and used a mask that I keyframed to move along with this O, as well as a qualifier to key out the center of this O and make it transparent to the clip behind so that I could fly right through. And I chose another shot that is also flying forward to kind of keep up that forward momentum from one shot to the next. Nothing super fancy happening with these shots. I didn't actually use any speed ramps in this, just a nice quick clean cuts edit. I wanted to sort of keep up the forward movement here. We're flying past this tree and out over everything. If we listen to the music here, you can see that because this is a relatively chill track without a lot of hard hit points, I'm actually not cutting a lot of the time on major hits. So right here, I'm just cutting kind of in the middle of the strings. And then for this next clip, boom, I do cut on a beat. And then again, we just kind of cut here in the middle, not much of a rhythm. As you can see here, I'm not always cutting slavishly to the timing, to the beat of the music. I'm letting the clips breathe and also varying the timing of my cuts so it doesn't get too boring and predictable. And then here's another shot. This shot is actually sped up quite a bit. If we go into our compound clip here, you can see that it is sped up to 282%, almost 3 times speed. And it just wasn't cutting it to stabilize it on the real-time clip. So I just made a compound clip out of it and then stabilized the compound clip with translation mode, and we get a nice, perfectly smooth shot. This is actually a shot I just happened to get. I just looked over and I saw the shot. I saw the truck going through there. I was like, this would be a great shot. I didn't have time to change my exposure, so I just quick flipped the drone into auto mode, and as you can see at the end here, it actually starts to get darker, so I had to use color stabilizer. Again, there's a separate tutorial in the course on how to use color stabilizer, but I just color stabilized that out, and it turned out to be one of my more favorite shots in the video. Then this here is again a relatively short clip. A lot of times with active track, you'll just get sometimes a shorter clip that is actually good, especially here because it was speeding up and slowing down with me. So you can see it kind of stops here and then it gets going just for this little short place, and then it kind of stops again. So I just made sure to cut right between those two sections so that we have a nice clean clip. And here we come to a major hit in the song, and that obviously gonna cut on that. This is a clip of just pulling back. I actually wish I'd kept this shot going a little bit longer. The drone is just stopping here in just a second. This car going in here was kind of cool, but it is what it is. And then here we have just a basic pull-up shot. Again, nothing fancy going on. This was really a pretty simple edit. It's more just about putting the clips in the right order, having something interesting going on. Now, this next clip here was active track on the drone. It kind of picked a cool line going around on the other side of this tree, and I thought that looked nice. But if we shut off our stabilization here, you can see that it kind of a little bit abruptly changes direction right there when it realizes that I'm going a different direction on the other side of the tree, which doesn't look great. Active track tends to do this. It's not always smooth. So to smooth that out, I just turned on stabilization, set the mode to translation, and put smooth to about 0.5. And as you can see, now the movement is perfectly smooth for that shot. And then next we are going to the shot of the car, and then I'm cutting to a different angle of the car driving. Now a top-down angle, kind of giving different angles of the same scene. Let this shot really breathe with the music. And then here we have a nice short clip again of a car driving. This is a different car driving, but like put it in a sequence anyway. Nobody cares, nobody will know the difference. And here we go, we are zooming past these rocks, and here I'm cutting as soon as we fully pass the rocks. You want to cut right there. I actually adjusted the timing of the clip. The first time I cut this clip in here, this one isn't color graded, but I didn't cut till after everything was good and well out of the frame, and that just doesn't feel quite as good as when you cut just as soon as the rocks are out of the frame. You can see we're like a couple frames out and we still have the corner of these rocks in the frame. You want to cut on the action as things move into and out of the frame. And then here we go, we're just pulling back with the drone. Again, nothing wild going on here. This is kind of a cool shot of pushing in and tilting down with the camera. Now for this shot, again, we did need to do some stabilization, because if we turn off stabilization, you can see it's just not quite perfectly smooth. It's actually pretty good. You probably wouldn't notice most of the time, but I figured I could make it a little bit better. So I turned on stabilization, used similarity mode, because we're kind of twisting with the camera as well as just going left and right and up and down. Again, nothing crazy going on here. Back to a car shot. Again, we're kind of using a sequence. Car coming toward the drone, this angle, and then we have car following the drone from a different angle, kind of giving that nice cinematic shot. And then if we turn our music back on here, you can hear this kind of boom. Final hit. Got this shot, kind of let it cool down. And then a hit that goes into our final shot. And then we have this little text that I pop up. And then I just did some color grading wipes here on the end. I've actually got another song that I threw on here. So that was the main edit. The other thing we did here is a bunch of sound design. Now I could spend forever going through all of this step by step, but here is what the first 20 seconds of the video sound like without sound design. And now with both music and sound design. So basically I've started by adding in kind of a forest ambience. I like to add some ambiences to a lot of the shots to just kind of make it feel like you're immersed in the environment. In reality, there's always some level of sound, especially outside. So if you can add that into your videos, it just makes them feel a little bit more real. So I'm adding a whoosh here as we go through that. Then we are adding some waterfall sounds as well. As we come up to this waterfall, you always want to include sound effects of what you're seeing in the video, just again to make it feel a little bit more real. Here we have a whoosh as we go past these trees. Always nice to add whooshes when you fly past things. Don't always have to do that. Now we've added in as well some forest ambience. We've added in some wind sounds. I love wind sounds in drone videos. They just really make it sound cool. Then here, just as we have a hit in the music, since this is a really long shot, I wanted to kind of change things up. So I add in some bird songs that fits with the environment in the woods, and it just kind of adds some extra interest to put them in halfway through just after a change in the music. Then here I actually added some audio of the windmills that I captured on location while we were at the windmills. I was actually filming something else, so I happened to have this audio, but it's a great idea to record some audio even just with your phone if you're at some kind of a location, because I literally could not find any windmill audio, and windmills definitely make a specific sound that I had in my head, but I couldn't find that anywhere. I usually get my sound effects on Artlist, but they didn't have any windmill sound effects. So I was able to use these sound effects that I recorded to get that sound of the blades swooshing through the air. So there you have a breakdown of how I edited this video. Next up is color grading. So starting off with our first clip here, I'm going to do a bit more of a breakdown on this shot, so you just sort of get the idea of the workflow I'm using for this entire video. So first things first, we have our D-Log M log correction node for the Mini 5 Pro. Actually, I'm using the one for the Air 3. They're practically the same. Doesn't really matter which drone you use it for. There are very slight differences, but they basically work the same. And on this first node, I've also warmed up the color temperature a little bit because it was a little bit cool to start with, so we just put in 210 color temperature. Now, as you can see, even with this log correction LUT applied, the shot is still super flat and boring. And this is a mistake a lot of drone pilots make. They just throw on a log correction LUT on their log footage and think it's color graded. No, it's not. That's just the first steps. That's just getting it into a color space where you can work with it. So on our next node here, we are adding a bunch of contrast. And the way we're doing that is instead of just using the contrast slider, that could work, but it is going to be way better to use our curves tool because we have way more control over what we're doing. So here I've just taken the white point and brought it all the way up. That's increasing the brightest parts in our images. So you can see if we go way too far, it's going to start clipping things, but we didn't go that far. We just went to a little ways across here. And then I've also grabbed my shadows and brought them down, because otherwise we would have brightened the shot, but we wouldn't have really added any contrast. So we've basically bumped up our highlights. You can see nothing's clipping over here in the waveform, but we've also brought down our shadows a little bit to give it some nice juicy contrast. And then our next node actually has a mask on it. If we go to our masks and turn on mask highlight, you can see I've selected this side of the shot and darkened it just slightly with the curves tool, mostly darkening the shadows, but obviously all of the tones as well. And then I did something similar with the other side of the shot, but I actually didn't end up darkening that much at all. And if we select these two nodes and turn them off and back on, you can see I'm just basically balancing out the brightness between the two sides of the image and drawing more attention to the river in the middle. And then our next clip here, you can see we are taking these green tones and pushing them into a little bit more of a true green color. On DJI drones, many times your greens end up a little bit yellow, which is what's happening right here. And so we have fixed that. The way we fixed that is we went over here into our HSL curves. We grabbed the hue of some of our yellows and some of our greens here. Obviously that is making it look terrible, but we just shifted them from being more yellowish to being more dark and deep green. And then coming over to our hue versus saturation curve, we've done little color boosts for our oranges and our reds to make these trees pop out of the shot a little bit more. And then our final node is a LUT. Let's see what kind of a LUT. This is my blue sea LUT from my Flying Filmmaker LUT pack. And that is just adding a little bit of cinematic colors. We have this turned down to about 30%, so it's not doing a ton, but just bringing those colors a little bit more into a nice cinematic look. And then if we turn everything off and back on, you can see it looks way better than to start with. Now this next shot here is pretty interesting because if we turn off all of our nodes, you can see there actually is some detail down here in the shadows that I theoretically could have pulled out and done kind of an HDR thing on the shot, used a bunch of masks, but I didn't do that. I let those shadows be shadows, and sometimes you don't want to try to recover all of the dynamic range in a shot, because in this case it creates a really dramatic look to have the shadows here where there are clouds really be dark and not be distracted by whatever's going on down there. So in this shot, obviously log correction first, that already brings our shadows down quite a bit. Then here we have a mask that is selecting just the sky, actually using our qualifier tool to just select the sky, and we are darkening that slightly and adding some contrast with curves. And then our next node is again a mask. This time we are selecting just the ground with just a regular gradient mask. And as you can see here, we are using our curves tool to massively brighten this up and create a whole bunch of pop in these trees. And I'm also using some points down here in the shadows to keep it from lightening up these trees here too much. And that would also get rid of a lot of the contrast over here. So instead we are keeping that nice and pulled down to create contrast in those trees and keep this dark. And then our next node is actually selecting this part of the shot and ever so slightly boosting up these shadows. As you can see, if we turn this off and back on, it is making ever so slight of a difference. I probably could have pulled a little more detail out of there and still gotten the effect, but I didn't. I just left it as it was. And then our next node is a LUT. It looks like this is our cold fog LUT, just adding a bit more extra contrast, really making these trees pop out and giving some cooler tones rather than the whole shot being too warm. Again, Mini 5 Pro footage really needs that. And then next up we have, again, I think our blue sea LUT, just kind of bringing in some nice cinematic colors. Again, a lot of these LUTs are turned down. Actually, this one's turned all the way up. But the trick is we have it on a mask, so it is only selecting the ground and not the sky, because otherwise, if we didn't have this mask, it would be making the sky kind of yellow and teal a little bit more than I want it to be. And then our final node is using our HSL curves, our hue versus luma curve, to pull down the luminescence of these blues. And then for our next grade here, we have, again, log correction, a bit of a white balance adjustment. We are adding a ton of contrast here with our curves. As you can see, we have a gradient mask just selecting the ground and not the sky, because again, I didn't want to totally blow out the sky. And then this node is again pushing some cool tones into the shadows while maintaining our midtones and highlights basically unchanged, just giving a little bit more color contrast. Pretty subtle adjustment there. But then this next node is something that I actually use throughout quite a bit of the video. This is an HSL curves node that basically increases the saturation and luminance of our yellows and reds while actually darkening our greens a little bit and shifting their hue over into a more bluish green look to create more of a color contrast between the darker greens and the brighter, more red and yellow tones in the shot. So to do that, I've basically locked in our yellow tones here. It can be a little bit hard to split between yellow and green, especially with the color response on the sensor and some of the leaves kind of in between, but we basically chose a point and split and pulled our greens down toward blue. You don't want to go too far, it starts to look fake, but just a little bit makes it look good. And then our saturation, we boosted up the saturation of our reds and our yellows, and we pulled actually down the saturation of our greens to give that kind of deep green desaturated look. And if you actually want this particular HSL curves look pre-built out as a power grade or as a LUT, you can download that with this lesson in the course. And then on our next shot here, this one is a really good example of how just the log correction LUT looks way worse than a full grade. So here we have our log correction. Then next up, we are just adding some contrast only to the ground, not the sky, bumping up those highlights a little bit so it's not so flat and boring. Then we're actually bumping up the sky a little bit as well, not quite as much as the ground though. And then our next node is just pushing a tiny bit of blue into our shadows and a bit of warmth in the highlights with our lift gamma gain wheels. Not a huge difference, but just a little subtle tweak there. And then here we have our custom HSL curves look again, giving us that nice pop. This is probably the single biggest thing that takes this shot from looking okay to looking great, is creating contrast between these green trees and these fall colors, giving these green conifers that nice deep green look. And then finally, we have a bit of a LUT here, a bit of cold fog, and a bit of blue sea. Again, these are turned way down, so they're barely doing anything. And this shot here is extremely simple. Log correction, contrast, mask to the sky to pull down the highlights. That is it. So there you have a breakdown of my full process for editing a cinematic drone video. As I mentioned, if you want to see the full extended version of this breakdown, it's included in my drone filmmaking course, Flying Filmmaker, along with over 70 other tutorials going in depth on my entire process for shooting, editing, and color grading cinematic drone videos. If you want to check that out, you can go to flyingfilmmakerpro.com, or if you aren't ready to join the full course, I put together a completely free 45-minute drone filmmaking training where I share my top 10 secrets to getting cinematic drone shots. And link to that is down in the description as well. You can click right here to watch another video, and as always, if you've enjoyed this video, make sure to tap the like button, subscribe so you don't miss future videos like this, and I'll see you in the next video.